Welcome, welcome. So you may be wondering why there are no other participants today. And what happened was I had my session and apparently didn't record it properly. So I'm doing this now so that I don't have to repeat this again. And in case you do want to follow this, you'll have that opportunity. So Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. So, of course, we are still very much in the midst of the issue of circumcision, the mitzvah that is mentioned in the book of Genesis. Very few mitzvot, but one of the few that is there. And we are going into detail as to the various aspects of it. And part of the reason for the all this obsession with the various needs to deconstruct it in all these ways has to do with a desire to express love for one's creator and to try and actually put into practice the commandment to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. And these are clear ways in which to do it. Part of the idea is that it's seen as a tremendous privilege that we have not only a belief in a transcendent creator, something, a power that makes everything else possible, and that if we are able to understand things, there is something that gave us a brain that is capable of that level of understanding and of learning, etc., and that by giving us these commandments, there is a way for human beings to try and bring the divine presence actively into this world. And the way one does it is to study how to do it as carefully as possible. In other words, to look at the blueprints and then to try to put the blueprints into reality. And the example is actually given of an architect who makes plans and then actually is able then to implement those plans into reality. So this is simply one element of it, and we're learning about the significance of circumcision, and we're going to go back to a comment and then just review it so that we have the context of it. We did not finish studying it the last time. I had to end in the middle, but in order to get a sense of it, then the flow of it, we really need to go back again. So this is part of this verse, Basar Ulato, the flesh of his foreskin. And here we go. I'll look at the actual verse where it comes from. This is chapter 17 in Genesis, verse 14. Va'arel zachar, an uncircumcised male, asher lo yimol ipsar ulato, who does not circumcise the flesh of his foreskin, v'nichrata hanefesh me'amela. That soul shall have to endure something called karet. Literally, it means cutting off. Whatever that means, that soul shall be cut off from its people, whether it means complete annihilation or whether it means something else. There are various attempts to try to understand what this means, right? But that's soul. And just to finish it up here, it retihefar. This is the reason given in the Torah as to why such a punishment should be administered. It is done, by the way, through a heavenly court. It is not done from a human being. No human court imposes this punishment. It is done strictly as something on the part of heaven. So he has profaned my covenant. So let's go back here. Basar orlato, the flesh of his foreskin. Mikan, and from this verse we learn Dehechi dalom mahale, that an individual whose father avuha, whose father did not see that he was circumcised, uvedina, or if the father didn't do it, or if he didn't have a father, that the Jewish court, the Beth Din, has to make sure and make arrangements for this person to be circumcised. Mechayev ihu lemahel nafshe. He himself is under the obligation to have himself circumcised. dichtiv, because it says here va'arel zachar, and a uncircumcised male, asher lo yimo, who does not perform circumcision, et besar olato, who does not circumcise the flesh of his foreskin, v'nichreta, he shall have to face karet. Shall have to face karet. So I'm going to let Torah T'mimah go ahead and explain what's going on. V'chiyuv atzmo, right? Gadol michiyuv ha'av Beth Din. He says the obligation on himself is still greater than the obligation that is placed on the father or the Beth Din or the court. Why? She'im lo nimo hu, because if he is not circumcised b'gedulato, or bigud when he has achieved majority, when he's an adult, yesh alav chiyuv, he has the liability of karet, which is not the case ha'av v'Beth Din. The father or the Beth Din do not have to face this liability of karet if they fail to see that he is circumcised. However, he will himself if he does. So that's the difference. Ein bahem rak chiyuv aseh. So what have they violated? They did not perform a positive commandment, and so they would have to face the consequences of failing to perform a positive commandment, which isn't karet. Ya'an, because the anush karet ketiv rak bo ba'atzmo, because as to this onesh karet, the punishment of karet is only written regarding himself, the pasuk zeh, in this particular verse. V'da'at harambam, and the opinion of Maimonides, beperik aleph halacha bet, in chapter 1, the second halacha, these chapters in the Mishnah Torah, in his encyclopedic work on Jewish law. Okay, it's divided into sections and into and subsections and chapters and subsections. Okay, Mimela. So this is and those smallest little pieces are called halachot, right? So chapter 1, Perik Aleph, halacha bet, halacha law 2, Mimila, regarding the laws of circumcision. To me, so this is his opinion, to me, shalom mal atzmo, that if a person doesn't see to it that he is circumcised, as mishi yagdil over b'chol yom, once he grows to a majority, once he has attained majority, adulthood, over b'chol yom, he transgresses every day al mitzvat aseh, regarding this positive commandment. So every day he remains uncircumcised, he is transgressing this positive commandment to be circumcised. Aval, however, eino chayav karet ad sheyamut. However, he is not liable to karet until he dies. At that point, he becomes liable for karet, a punishment of karet. And this is not the opinion of the Ravad, Avraham ben David of Postier. He is a major, how can I put it? He speaks and critiques by Maimonides. He's his primary interlocutor. Okay, and so it's not his opinion, Ella. However, his opinion is the b'chol yom hu omed b'isur karet, that every single day he is standing with this prohibition that goes along with the liability of karet with it every single day. Doesn't have to wait until he dies. V'hamefarshim herichu v'zeh, and the ones who comment on these and discuss these, commentators, they themselves spent a lot of time, spilled a lot of ink on this particular difference in these opinions. Ulefela, however, Torah T'mimah says it's amazing. Shelo heiru hamefashim, that the interpreters did not take note that Kedivrei Hayravad, right, that in commenting on the words of the Ravad, Katfu Gam HaTosafot, the Tosafot, that's Rashi's grandchildren, who are found on the pages of the Talmud and so often disagree with their grandpa, right? But here their comment is the Makot Yud Dalet Aleph in the tractate called Makot, page 14, excuse me, A. V'ra'ui laha'ir, l'dalat harambam. And it is worth noting that according to the opinion of the Rambam, of Maimonides, Nimsa Kan, we find here in this opinion of his, Remez Nimratz, a compelling allusion, the Torah, in the Torah itself, the Hash'arat HaNefesh, Uschara V'onsha, to the idea of the immortality of the soul and its reward and its punishment. Why? Ya'an dekevan she'eno chayav karet ad she'amut, because we're saying that since he in fact is not, he does not receive karet until or be subject to that liability until he actually dies, harehu noseh avon hakaret la'achar mitah. He is going to have to face this punishment of karet after he dies. Ve'ien masha katuv la'el, or masha katavti la'el, he says, and check out what I wrote above, the Parshat Noach, in the Parsha of Noah, the section regarding Noah, the Pasuk Va'ach et dimchem lenashotechem edrosh, where it's talking about murder, and it says, however, your blood, according to your souls, I will require. And so clearly he has something else to say about the issue of immortality there, quite possibly. So without looking at it now, going on. Veshiur hagadlut, the inyan onesh karet. And regarding, sorry, this is not the degree, it's the, we're talking about the actual age, right? So hagadlut. So the issue here, forgive me, this is incorrect. What it's saying is, and how old you are, okay? The age one is, right? Regarding onesh karet. In other words, an age to be liable to karet, that's what he's saying here. In other words, how old you have to be subject to karet. Bazeh lo nitba'er meforash, right? Regarding this particular law, it's not explicitly stated, right? At how old do you have to be to have attained your majority if you are going to be liable to karet? Omnam, however, b'makom acher, in another place, matzinu shebi'er harambam, we find that Maimonides clarifies meforash, right, explicitly, the ben yud gimel shana nikra gadol, that with regard to 13 years of age, he is considered an adult. That with regard to in general, and he says, Gam le'inyan chiyuvei karet. He says, even when it comes to being liable to karet, he just has to be 13 years old, and at that point, he would then be liable to this punishment. V'hu beperik bet halacha yud, he gives you the actual, Torah T'mimah gives you the actual reference. It's in chapter 2 of and halacha 10 me'ishut, from the section of the Mishnah Torah called Ishut. And Ishut deals with, in other words, the relationships between people. But tzarich liyun, and we need to look at this further, lahashvot ze imad kaiman, to be able to harmonize this with, or to satisfy this with what we have as a tradition, she'ein Beth Din shel mala, that the high court in heaven, that the divine court, ma'anishim, ever actually exact a punishment, kodem esrim shana, prior to 20 years. In other words, you have to be 20 years before a punishment is actually exacted. Hold on one second. Yes. You're going? Thank you. Muchas gracias. Thank you. So let's see. Kemuvu'ar b'Shabbat, as is clarified in the Tractate Shabbat of the Talmud, page 89, bet the B side of the page. Upirush HaMishnut, Mishnayot, and in the explanation of the Mishnayot, of Mishnah, the Rambam, of the Rambam. So I think the Rambam was 18 years old when he wrote a commentary, I believe, in Judeo-Arabic on the Mishnah, on all those 6 orders of the Mishnah. Amazing what a genius this man was. And it has been translated into Hebrew at this point, and you can read the Maimonides commentary on the Mishnah. Okay. Perek Zayin de Sanhedrin, and in the Mishnah, it's chapter 7 in Sanhedrin, where the Rambam writes this. V'tzarich lomar, and we'd have to say, Dema sheyesh bo chiyuv karet min yud gimel shana, that when it's talking about the fact that he has this liability of karet from 13 years old of age, hu le'inyanim she'efshar linhog, and I think this is Bezeh Hazman. It has to do, I believe that that's what this abbreviation has to do. So it has to do with matters where you can in fact apply this law at that particular age. In other words, between 13 and 20. But then you can actually do that. Kagon, he gives the example, Lahal koto arba'im, right? So in other words, he can be given a 40, actually 39 lashes, okay, that one can apply lashes, ulefotromi karet, and in that case, that is considered his punishment, and he no longer has to face karet. It can exempt him from karet. Yen lefanenu b'parshat Tetzei. He says, look ahead when we get to the parsha of Ki Tetzei in Deuteronomy. The pasuk and the verses v'nikla achicha le'einecha. It means this is law that says not to beat him any more than 39 lashes, unless so that to prevent your brother from being humiliated before you. But od yesh pratim shonim, and there are certainly other details as well. Aval guf ha'onesh, right? But the actual, when he says guf ha'onesh, meaning that the actual punishment itself, right? Not stripes anymore, not flogging, but the actual punishment itself, Einoba, does not actually inhere ela la'achar 20 shana. At that particular point, there may well be the actual punishment of karet. V'yein b'sefer Nachal Eitan, and he says you could look further in a book called Nachal Eitan, and I looked this up, and Nachal Eitan is the name of a commentary by Rabbi Avraham Maskil the Eitan in 19th century on the Mishnah Torah. So that makes perfect sense that that's what it's talking about here. Okay. Perik Aleph, chapter 1, Halacha Yud Gimel, Halacha 13, Isurei Bia. This is the part of the Maimonides Code of Jewish law, and there's a section called Isurei Bia, meaning the prohibition of intimacy. In other words, those areas where Jewish law prohibits intimacy between a man and a woman. And that's how far we got. And I hope this is helpful to you. Thank you.